Toyota launched the Corolla at the end of 1966, along with its own sales channel. As is tradition for Toyota, Corolla is another name for Crown. Initially offered as a 151-inch long coupe on a 90-inch wheelbase, with a 51 horsepower 1100cc 4 and a 4-speed, advertising a 100cc advantage over its Datsun counterpart, with a claimed top speed over 85 miles an hour. It used leaf springs all the way around. 1967 added a sedan and wagon, and an optional Toyo Glide 2-speed automatic. Several changes were made for 1968, mostly aimed at the American market, where they were priced from $1,400 to $3,900. These changes included a padded dash and revised bumpers, as well as other safety improvements. But there was also a sportier Corolla Sprinter coupe for the year. It used a 59 horsepower twin-carb engine, and sold outside of the regular Corolla network. Late in 1969, the engine was upgraded to a 1.2-liter, bumping horsepower by approximately 5, with a new model arriving in 1970. Bigger at 155 to 157 inches long on a 92-inch wheelbase, and weight was up to 1,600 to 2,000 pounds. Front suspension was upgraded and now included a sway bar. The Sprinter was still offered, but it was no longer badged as a Corolla. Bigger 1.4 and 1.6-liter engines were also added to the line, with up to 88 horsepower, followed shortly thereafter by a twin-cam version with 102 horsepower that was not available in the U.S. And performance models would be expanded in 1972 to include the Corolla 11 and Sprinter Trueno, or Thunder and Lightning, adding a 5-speed, and horsepower ranged from 108 to 113 for quarter-mile times in the high 16s. The Sprinter also now included a 4-door version. There would also be sporty 5-speed S5 and SR5 packages of the Corolla Coupe. By 1974, the Corolla was already the best-selling car in the world, and although it wasn't a top seller in the U.S., sales were still quite respectable for its class. It would also be the last year of the second-generation Corolla in most markets, except the wagon, which carried on for up to 4 more years. And Daihatsu would start offering a version of the car as the Charmant, or Charming. The new Corolla was slightly roomier, being 157 inches long on a 93-inch wheelbase, and weight was up to 1,700 to 2,100 pounds. A 60-horsepower 1.3-liter was added to the engine lineup, as was a 2-door liftback and a 3-speed Toyo Glide. The Sprinter models got more distinct styling, and U.S. packages were Standard, Deluxe, and SR5. Prices started at over $2,700, and critics called it heavy and expensive for the segment, but it still proved popular for those looking for higher mileage, being rated at 26 to 30 miles per gallon. It would get a minor facelift after just over a year, and soon a rear sway bar was added. And the Sprinter would get another minor facelift in 1978. There would be another redesign introduced in 1979 with coil spring rear suspension. Reliability was improved, and production reached an all-time high in 1980 with a total of 775,000 globally. It was once again bigger at 159 to 166 inches long on a 95-inch wheelbase and 1,700 to 2,200 pounds. And engines would begin to shuffle, gaining a 1.8-liter version of the overhead valve engine, before starting to transition to a more powerful overhead cam design of 1.5 or 1.6 liters, with up to 90 horsepower. The sporty dual overhead cam 113 horsepower versions such as the 11 remained, and the 4-door versions of the Sprinter Trueno were now called the Sprinter GT. A 1.8-liter diesel was added in some markets for 1982, but by 1983 the Corolla line was getting a bit convoluted, perhaps explaining why it lost its bestseller title to the likes of the Ford Escort and Chevy Cavalier. While the sportier Corolla 11 and Sprinter Trueno received updated, more aerodynamic styling on their rear-wheel drive platform, the more mundane sedans and wagons, and the new smaller hatchback Corolla FX, moved to front-wheel drive. The front-wheel drive cars were on a bigger 97-inch wheelbase and were 163 to 168 inches long, while the FX hatchback was 156 to 160 inches long, depending on the market. Soon the Corolla was being built in a dozen countries, including the US, where it was less successful than the previous versions, with a variant of the Sprinter body being used by Chevrolet and sold as the Nova. And the dual overhead cam engine and Trueno body would also come to the US as the Corolla Sport, or SR5 and GTS. In fact, there were several more packages, with DX, GL, SE, SX, and GT being some of the more common ones. And in addition to all that, there was the Sprinter Carib, short for Caribou, essentially a tall Tercel wagon with four-wheel drive, and the Tercel itself was being sold as the Corolla 2 in some markets, 165 to 170 inches long on a 95-inch wheelbase, and around 2,200 pounds, using the 1.5-liter engine with 70 horsepower. 1985 would see the first of a new line of overhead cam engines aimed at economy instead of performance. Sizes remained similar, starting with a 1.2-liter with 65 horsepower. Although there was a new Corolla for 1988, the previous version would carry on in some markets through 1999. This sixth-generation car was 170 to 172 inches long on a 96-inch wheelbase and saw a major improvement in refinement. Then there was a supercharged version of the 1.3-liter Levin and Trueno with 140 horsepower. The rear-wheel drive versions were discontinued, but all-track four-wheel drive was available on some versions, specifically the new Sprinter Carib, which was now actually a regular Corolla and used a bigger 1.6-liter. And other Corollas still came with a full range of trim levels, including XL, GL, SE, GT, and SX. This version would also be sold as the Holden Nova and Geo Prism. It proved to be more successful than the outgoing model, and prices in the US ranged from $9,000 to $12,000. There would be a 25th anniversary edition for 1990, and it would get the new Toyota logo the following year. Also for 1991, the Corolla moved up from the subcompact segment to the compact segment, now 161 to 168 inches long on a 97-inch wheelbase, weighing 2,000 to 2,600 pounds, although the Carib remained on the previous design. Aerodynamics were once again improved, and Geo continued to sell a version of the Sprinter as the Prism, while the Sprinter GT used a dual overhead cam 1.3-liter with variable valve timing and 158 horsepower. There was also a new sport coupe version called the Senos, or Paseo when it came to the US, and for 1992 there would be a new pillared hardtop body style with a sort of hidden B-pillar, as the Corolla Cirrus or Sprinter Merino. Versions for North America arrived in 1993 with only the 1.6 and 1.8 liters, with up to 115 horsepower, with both imported and domestically produced cars selling here to keep up with demand. For 1995, in Japan only, there was an ultra-rare TRD 2000. The 5-speed came with a heavy-duty clutch and quicksilver shifter, and the brakes and suspension were also upgraded. Power came from a 2-liter with approximately 180 horsepower. Only 10 were sold. But an updated Corolla was introduced the same year, and styling would be altered for different markets. Asia, Europe, and North America each got their own look in an effort to improve sales in each market. The Carib would also be updated to this version, but now shared its body with the regular Corolla wagons. The Corolla surpassed the Volkswagen Beetle in total production in 1997, with North America getting the new version the next year, but only as a sedan and only with the 120 horsepower 1.8-liter. And in spite of the discontinuation of Geo, there would still be a Prism version, but with Chevrolet badging. It would also be around this time the Corolla started to transition to a new line of all-aluminum dual overhead cam engines. For 2001, Corollas would be bigger, 173 to 178 inches long on a 102-inch wheelbase. The standard wagon was called the Fielder, and the Carib was gone. But there were other tall wagon variants, such as the Spacio, Verso, and Matrix. The last was also being sold in the US as the Pontiac Vibe. The Sprinter was effectively replaced by the Alex hatchback, while packages and trim levels varied dramatically from market to market. But in the US we're down to the CE, LE, and S, with prices starting around $13,000. 2004 models received a minor facelift, and the manual transmission was dropped except on the sportier versions, such as the 2005 XRS, with an 170 horsepower version of the 1.8 liter, compared to the standard 130 horsepower, while Europe would get a supercharged version with 215 to 224 horsepower. Regulations kept new models for 2006 different in the different markets, with more than a dozen variants. The home market versions typically being the smallest at 174 inches long, where the 166-inch long hatchback became the Urus. Sedans were now the Corolla Axio and the wide-body version known as the Altis. Bigger 2-liter and 2.4-liter engines were added to the list of available options in some markets, as was continuously variable transmission. North America got the 179-inch long wide-body version for 2008, as well as the optional 2.4-liter with 158 horsepower, which was rated at 22 to 30 miles per gallon. 2011 would see a facelift, and power windows and door locks became standard, and it would see an updated engine design. Japan and much of Asia got an updated Corolla for 2012, still as the Axio, Fielder, and Urus, which was now also available as a sports wagon. And 2013 would add a hybrid to the mix, which more than doubled the maximum mileage. Around the same time, the new version of the bigger international Corolla was introduced, first in North America and then in Europe, 182 inches long on a 106-inch wheelbase and just over 2,800 pounds. The car would finally break into the top 10 selling vehicles in the U.S., but was still overshadowed by the bigger Camry. The Japanese version would get a facelift for 2015, with China reviving the Levin name on their version. North America got their facelift in 2017 and an anniversary edition. Variants would be somewhat simplified with the redesign of 2018. The hatchback became the Corolla Sport. There was the smaller Sporty or Levin version of the sedan and the bigger International or Prestige version, as well as a touring wagon. And for the first time, the regular 2-liter engine was offered in Japan. In the U.S., neither all-wheel drive nor the hybrid were offered on the hatchback. For 2021, there was a limited Apex edition, essentially a handling package. And for 2022, the 2-liter was up to 169 horsepower, and the CVT was standard, while the 6-speed was dropped, only to return the following year on the new GR Corolla, or Gorilla, a high-performance model using a 1.6-liter turbo 3-cylinder with up to 300 horsepower, powering all 4 wheels. A bit pricey, starting at just over $35,000, or $13,000 more than the base model. But it can do a low 13-second quarter mile, top 140 miles an hour, and average 20 miles per gallon. An 8-speed automatic version became available for 2023. But the Corolla has always been about cheap and reliable transportation more than anything else. And there's no reason to believe that when the next one arrives in 2026, it will be any different. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.